board meeting, and we have lots of interesting business tonight. A lot of good discussions. I'm going to have to make a couple of adjustments to the agenda. We have an additional, we have to approve an Act 250 permit, so that's an addition. And I'm going to move the number 2, 3, and 4 and the Act 250 permit down to the bottom so that we can bring some other information that we want to deal with closer to the beginning of the meeting. We have so far, well, 3 of our 8 legislators had said that they could attend. So hopefully we'll have more than that. So I'm going to move the conversation about voting on our budget and the conversation about what our unapproved budget update, the update from the legislature, up to the 4th item. So we'll go from call to order and a little introduction, and then we'll go to our discussion, which will take a few, maybe 10 minutes, and then we'll launch into the 2 legislature-related topics. Any questions or anything I forgot, Lyle? Am I off to a decent start? Okay. Let me just make sure nobody is waiting right now. Okay. So what I want to remind people, you probably all know by now that on if you click on participants, you'll get a panel on the right-hand side, and at the bottom there's a thing that says raise your hand, and you can click on that and raise your hand, and then I will see that. Hopefully, it pops up to the top, I've learned. So if I just watch the top, I can tell if somebody wants to talk. Generally, I'd like to hear from board members first, and sometimes I forget to ask if there are other people who wish to comment. So please take full advantage of the little blue hand. And then take it down too when you're done if it doesn't go automatically. Also, everyone comes in muted, but what I'd like you to do is when you raise your hand, I'll call on you if you unmute yourself, and then remember to remute. I can do it if I hear your papers rustling or your dog barking or something. I can look up and see that you're not muted, and I can mute you again at that point, but then I'm not paying attention to what I'm supposed to be doing. So I'd appreciate if you could manage the mute button yourself. We're all getting pretty good at this, so hopefully it'll become take no attention whatsoever. So the first thing is our discussion, and this is part of one of our policies is educating the board, and my responsibility and the superintendent's responsibility is to manage a lot of that. So what we've been doing is just going through some documents that are pretty generic, like the legislation around our powers and the characteristics of effective school boards. So I'm going to pop that back up, and then we're just going to look at a few policies that represent our goals and our values, and how those are. That's the policy part, and then the governance part, which is included in many of the policies, which is the direction to the administration or to the board for actions. So let's start with just a reminder of the 8 characteristics of school boards. And I'm not going to go through all of them because mostly I want to look at the first one again. The committing to a vision of high expectations for student achievement, quality instruction, and defining clear goals toward that vision. And so the first policy, whoops, I've got to screen it again or share it again. The first policy is this is D for education, educator supervision and evaluation, probationary teachers, and all teachers. This is the policy for supervision. And basically, all of these policies are the same. They lay out the value and what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then there's in this case, there's a direction that the principal will collaborate with the superintendent to prepare and deliver at least annually to the school board a progress report and recommendations about the effectiveness of the supervision and evaluation system. It doesn't say that the principal will report to us what the evaluations were of all of the employees, or the superintendent will necessarily report to us on the principals. It's just that they have a system, they're using it, and they're talking about the effectiveness of it and evaluating it and bringing us some evidence that that's working and is in place. And so now I have to go back and get another one. Maybe I can just click on this. Down on the bottom of this, or on the other side of this policy, it talks about the principal collaborating with the superintendent to prepare and deliver at least annually to the school board a progress report on recommendations on the effectiveness of the supervision and evaluation system and practices. So this is something that's supposed to happen every year, and I think because we were all individual school boards, a lot of these things didn't happen every year. They were much more informal, but now that we are more formal and are overseeing so many schools, we're going to have to really pay attention to these policies and the systems that they've created. So I'm going to go out and then come back again with another one. And this is the board relation with administrators. Is that filling your screen? Do you have a lot of things on the screen, or just this one document? Paul,
just one document.
Just the document, great, okay. So this one is Board C7, Board Relation with Administrators. The policy of the school district to encourage school board interactions with school administration while respecting appropriate reporting relationships. And here again, the action, the value is that we want to have positive reactions or positive relationships, appropriate relationships with the administration. So and the superintendent in this case will conduct an annual performance review of each administrator. And prior to that review, we'll seek input from the board. So we will talk with the superintendent about what we're looking for, what concerns we have, or what anything that's on our mind about it. And then the superintendent evaluates and reports back to us. And again, this is something that we haven't made use of a lot, but it's something that we are going to have to follow a little more closely. I'm going to stop and let a few people in, and then go back to the screen. And this policy is curriculum development and coordination. I'm going to turn off my answering machine. The school district curriculum shall be coordinated to allow students to meet or exceed standards established by the Vermont Board of Education. That would be, if we redrafted that now, we would talk about proficiency, we talk about standards and assessment, we talk about the framework. Other than just directly to the board, it would be more specific. But the purpose is that it's coordinated to allow students to meet or exceed the standards, and that in this case, the superintendent shall conduct systematic evaluations of all programs with the curriculum and report the results to the school board at least annually. So again, another annual report that we will be expecting in the future. We haven't necessarily gotten these in every school board in the past, in every school board every year, but again, that's something that we're going to need to start doing. So I'm going to change again. And this one is, these last two actually have to do with some of the things we're going to be talking about later in the meeting, community involvement and parent involvement. So I wanted to bring those up and have those be the ones that we finished up with, so it's going to freshen our minds. Obviously, our policy, our value is to encourage the support the involvement of parents in their children's education. That has never meant as much as it means right now, because we are in a position, and we probably likely remain in the position for a long time, of helping parents create more effective learning environments in the home. and working with them to help deliver education. I think we may be near the end of every kid being in school every day for 12 or 13 years. But at any rate, our goal is to support parents. And new initiatives mandate and encourage the strengthening of parent, school, and community relationships. This has been true for any number of initiatives, particularly grant programs. There have come along in the past, and certainly the CARES Act, which for Vermont is $1.25 billion, and the Emergency Relief Fund also, both of those require that community be involved in developing the proposals and in implementing whatever things we want to do, that we want to get the grant money for. So it's something that we have to do if we want to perform in the wider world, but it's also really important to us. And there are a couple of specific things about that. It's our responsibility to provide the parents with opportunities to become informed about program design, operation, evaluation, and to communicate with educators on these subjects. And this is, we've done this in a number of ways. But again, because of the situation we're in now, it's going to be greatly expanded. And the same with number 4, parents should be provided with information and opportunities intended to improve their abilities to work with their children at home and in school, and to build partnerships between home and schools. And I wanted to show you this one because it's so timely, despite the fact that we re-adopted it when we formed the new board in 2019, but this has been on the books for a long time. And it anticipated all of the things that we're having to deal with in a much more immediate and much more visceral way right now. So one more policy. And this one is the school community relations. And again, our value and the policy that we built around it is to encourage the involvement of the community in the schools. And again, implementation requires us to reach out to the community to create plans, systematic two-way communication processes between the board and the school community. And the board delegates to the principal, superintendent, or community relations officer, in our case, the superintendent, responsibility for developing a community relations program which conforms to the above principles. So those are let me get rid of this and stop sharing the screen and let a few more people in. So those are the some of the values that have been put into policy and that are implemented, that we've been implementing over the years, and particularly the one with parents and community that we're going to be expanding. It's going to be taking on an additional meaning now in this current setting. So any questions from anybody, or any comments or thoughts? Or I guess if you want to stop me, if you want me to stop doing these things, tell me that privately and we'll find another way to go about it. But any comments on any of those policies or any thoughts? Okay, I don't see any hands up. So next thing is to talk about the unapproved budget, our unapproved budget update, and the situation that we are in right now. And Frank, I don't know if you have any additional new information. I can kind of tell you, talk about where the House Education Committee left it last week after they met on Friday and discussed it. But basically, it's not any different than when we last met. So, Frank, do you have any information fresh today or anything to?
Nothing new. We were hoping that we would have something different, but no, nothing new. And my understanding, Dan French has indicated that he's also waiting for clarification on how, when the funds do become available, how we might apply for it and the timeline. But yep, nothing definitive since our last meeting.
So the situation then currently is that the Senate Education Committee believes that the best solution, given all the circumstances at this moment, are for the for the 19 districts that don't have budgets approved for various reasons, some were defeated, some had their meetings canceled, or their votes canceled like we did. And their view is that approving our FY20 spending, this year's spending, and for next year, approving the same rate for next year would be the best solution, because at least that's been voted on, and that would allow us to operate. And that also, their perspective also is that we can vote, we can add our proposed budget to a vote at any time and get more, and make up the difference. But the best way to proceed right now is to go ahead and just use the FY20 until it's safe or healthy to vote. And the House Ed Committee has talked in a lot more detail and really looked at the individual districts and looked at several different options. And their perspective, I think, starts from, it's just not fair for us, for these 19 districts, to start this pandemic, this new world behind, without the full budgets that they need for this year, since all the other districts in the state have passed them. And then there obviously are the implications of the reductions or the other things that would have to happen. But they have not been able to come to an agreement about how to proceed. And they adjourned last Friday after at least a 2-hour conversation, deciding that they would just take the weekend to think about it. But as of a few hours ago, they had not scheduled, they had not put it on an agenda, and it may be that it'll go on the end of their agenda this coming Friday. The situation that leaves us in is that, and again, if the legislature, if they don't agree on something and agree with the Senate and get something through the 2 houses and signed by the governor, we will be in a position on July 1st of having to operate with what we know we will have, which is the default budget. If our budget does, if we get voted down, if our budget is voted down, we will be on the 30th. We will have a default budget, which is 87% of this year's spending, and it's actually a little bit less than that because we have to spend all of our reserves first. But it's I think just the ballpark figure, it's somewhere in the vicinity of $5 million that that we're going to have to offer contracts based on, rather than on what we proposed for a budget, because we don't have an approved budget. So we can't go ahead with money that we don't know we have. So that's a pretty tough spot to be in. And I see that Frank has his hand up, and Emily. So Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, just yep, good context, David. I just wanted to clarify that the 3 points around budget authority. So the Senate version did not refer to the prior year budget. It was the prior year education spending figure.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and so the difference is our prior year budget is $900,000 more than the current year. Our current year is that we're projecting FY21 that we are at. We had proposed to the budget to the voters. That's up $900,000, and then the education spending is up $2 million because we were not a merged district when we were formed in the context of the FY20 budget plan. So
right.
just wanted to clarify that. And then the 87%, yeah, it would be a severe sort of constraint to operate, obviously, July, August, September. But that 87% is only a placeholder for the point at which the board and the community have an opportunity to reconsider a budget. So it seems unlikely that we would stay at the 87%, but it is theoretically possible. The intent is that we just get to borrow money of 87% of our prior year until the voters approve a budget proposed by the board.
Right. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Emily?
Thanks. I'd love to give an update from the perspective of inside the State House, if that's helpful on this debate. So the Senate is, as it's been said, concerned about not following the exact will of the voters. It's struck me and struck the House that leaving a decision up to the school board is as close to the will of the voters as you can get, because they're closer to the voters than, say, a senator is covering an entire county. The dynamics of operating virtually means that we seek more agreement between the House and the Senate than we might ordinarily do, because things like conference committees don't really work in this environment particularly well. One piece of context that might be helpful for this conversation is that the House passed unanimously last week a piece of legislation that allows the Brattleboro Select Board to pass a temporary budget based on what was warned for town meeting, which is essentially exactly what we're asking for school boards. And that bill passed the Senate today because it went through different committees. And so for some context, a lot of the theory around this is not as sticky as it might seem. And so that gives me some hope that we can all get to the same page, because they are identical theoretical constructs. They just have some slightly different feelings and personalities around them. I appreciate the point about the 87% being what's available to be borrowed, and that you could hypothetically spend more in your first quarter in anticipation of a vote. I convened a meeting of all the legislators who represent communities that have not passed a budget yet, both folks with failed budgets and folks who, like us, have not had a chance to vote yet, to try to see if we could find more similarities and move the House conversation along a little bit. Many of those communities are moving forward with a vote, as I'm sure you're aware, and just hoping to have at least a first round of voting before July 1st. And that what's the two options that seem to be on the House table right now are trying to push forward this bill and seeking compromise with the Senate from there, or coming back in August if there are still communities like ours who have not had a chance to vote, which I realize is after many of the deadlines that anyone would want anything to happen, but is a little bit better than never.
Just a couple clarifications. The Brattleboro, the vote for on the Brattleboro town budget, to approve the town budget, was Brattleboro is the only town that has a representative town meeting. So they're the only town that's in the situation. So it's a little bit easier to deal with.
Yes,
the other,
I could say just that funny town, Brattleboro. We're going to let them do this funny thing, that funny town that does all those weird things.
Yeah, the one and only Brattleboro. The other thing, though, is that on June 1st, we have to operate based on what we know for sure. And that means that we will have to send RIF notices to a significant number of employees. And it may be that we'll get a budget passed at the end of the month, and then we can send those contracts out. But that's just an incredible amount of stress and anxiety, and possibly people moving on to other jobs. And they're the tech-savvy, energetic young people that we really looked hard, found and hired and have been working with, and are really great people. And it seems, well, I'm not going to editorialize too much, but it seems unnecessary.
I find the amount of frustration, pain, and confusion that we're leaving to communities to deal with right now to be unconscionable, and I'm sorry about it, and really encourage folks who have colleagues in other parts of the state to make sure that other parts of the state are having as dynamic a conversation with their legislators about this as you all have had with us, because that has not been my experience when I've talked to my colleagues. And so we are doing our very best to raise this alarm bell inside our body. And I should say now that Molly Burke, Representative Burke, really wanted to get on this call today and just couldn't get the buttons to work. And I see Representative Coffey here. We're doing our very best to sort of raise alarm bells with our colleagues, but it's much more meaningful when it comes directly from someone's community. And so I know all of you have colleagues throughout the state and friends throughout the state, and know parents and teachers and everyone throughout the state. And that's a really important way we can push this conversation a little bit further in the House, because the House committee is on board. We just need to help them find the political courage.
Okay, Representative Coffey. Oh, just before you do, for people that have come in since after the beginning meeting, at the bottom, if you click on participants at the bottom of your screen, you'll get a little panel on the side, and at the bottom there's a raise hand icon you can click on if you wish to speak. Generally, we like to hear from the board members first, but I sometimes forget to ask the general public if they have something to say. So if you click that, I see the little blue hand, and then I can make sure you get a chance to speak. And also, everyone is muted, and so if you wish to speak and you put your hand up and I call on you, please unmute yourself, and then mute yourself on the way back. And I noticed that Peter Gould just came in, so that may be Molly.
No, it's
So,
actually Molly.
Great. Hi, Molly. Sarah Coffey is about to speak, and
Okay.
so welcome to
I
the
got
meeting.
locked out and I had to use Peter's computer.
Okay, great. Welcome.
Hi, Molly. Hi, everyone. Thank you, David, for including us in the conversation. And I just wanted to echo and some of the things that Representative Kornheiser said. You know,
I'm afraid you've frozen, Sarah.
We really are working on broadband too. We know that's a huge educational equity issue as well as a political problem.
So are we.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I think my
right.
connection is back. Anyway, I just want to quickly say, just to reiterate, we're in the House, we're pretty empathetic as a lower house, we're closer to the people, and I think we're empathetic to the challenge that our community and the 18 other communities are facing with this vote. And I have been in active conversation with the Guilford Leadership Council and the Guilford members of the school district board, as well as our town clerk in Guilford. And, you know, I have a question for you all. Are you going to be making the decision? My understanding is that you had to make a decision to warn a vote pretty soon if you're going to do that. And that, because I don't think that a decision is going to be made quickly, or a resolution will be made quickly within the State House. So I heard in your opening remarks, David, that you were considering, and with Frank's comments, that you're considering adopting the default budget and then doing a vote later?
No, we decided 2 weeks ago to warn a vote, and tonight we have to decide how we want to carry out the balloting, the actual voting.
So your decision is tonight, really, about how to move forward with the voter approval?
How we're going to run the process is we set the June 30th as a date, and we decided that we would wait until June 1st to decide what we would do with the ballot and whether we would go through with it. But we have to have a ballot ready to go so that absentee voters, and it's a 40-day window. So
yep.
We have to decide what's going to be on the ballot today.
Yeah, so I appreciate that, and it's really frustrating that the legislative process is not in tune with your timeline. However, I was really concerned about the capacity in some of our town clerks' offices, you know, being able to do such a vote. But earlier today, I spoke with our town clerk in Guilford, and she has a really good perspective on it, and she feels pretty confident. And it already sounds as if things have been, there's been some good communication across towns on how this might happen. So, which I'm really glad to see, because I do think that this body, this school district body, should feel empowered as best it can, because we know that the situation that we have with our newly merged district, how this year's budget compared with last year's budget is quite different. So I wish that we had better news from the legislature, frankly. I'm very, very frustrated that that the Senate position is so hard. So if there is advocacy that folks know from, you know, with members of that committee try to do that, but I'm encouraged to hear that you're thinking that you're going to move forward with a vote.
Yeah, we are definitely going to move forward with the vote. We have to, and if it's passed, then we're fine. I think I would just, and we'll talk in a few, and I hope you'll stay around for the conversation, because I know that the town clerks have been concerned about the election, and that's why we're doing both of these items right now in the beginning of the meeting, so you can be around to hear about the difficulty with the election as well. But I want to make sure that you understand, if our vote passes, and that's there's a range of opinion about how likely that is given the current circumstances. Although tax receipts were pretty good, at least in Brattleboro, I think it was about 98% of people paid their taxes on time, so it's not as bad as we were fearing. But if it doesn't pass, well, whether it passes or not, on June 1st, if the legislature does not do anything, we have to lay off somewhere around the vicinity of $5 million worth of people, and we can find some, a little bit of money here and there, but that's a lot of people, and we have to send them those RIF notices. If the Senate bill passed, then it would be $2 million that we would have to reduce. It's fewer people, but it's still, I think, 11 part-time or full-time positions. And but if neither of those happens, but if the Senate doesn't, then we have to do the $5 million. And if the budget passes later on, we can get them back. But the difference between the Senate or the legislature acting and not acting is how many RIF notices we have to send out on the 1st. I just want to make it really clear that's the situation.
Unless you pass the budget.
Well, no, the budget vote is June 30th. We have to RIF on June 1st. We have to notify people on June 1st. It's actually May 1st, but we don't have a budget in place, so it got extended to June 1st. So that's the circumstance we're in. So Emily, I see you have a comment again, and I wanted to hear from board members if they had any comments, and then from the public, and then we'll go over to talk about the election or the vote.
I'm curious if it's the position of the board that you would prefer the Senate proposal to waiting a little bit longer and figuring out if we could get the House proposal to clear.
Well, we haven't decided on a position on that question. The first time we talked about it was a month ago, and we decided we would love to have our regular budget. If not, the FY20 with an inflation adjustment would be fine. Those two things would be fine. Basically, it would be harmless. Great. Any board members? Any comments or any questions? Okay, Jody Normando, I see your hand up.
I am unmuted now.
Yes.
Hi there. I wanted to ask the two legislators, representatives, especially Emily talked about some people not maybe dragging their feet and not being for the proposal. I wrote to almost everybody I could think of, but if there's particular people that you think need to be written to, could you get back to me and let me know their names and their districts? And because of the Act 46, most of us know a lot of people in all the districts in the state. And I think we could write to them and try to get them to back something that's good for us. Thank you, and I'll unmute.
Okay, well, let's move to the discussion about the vote.
David,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. I think Sean's been trying to get your attention.
Sean, use the blue hand on the bottom, please.
I am.
It's there now. Good. Yep. Go ahead.
I've had it on right along.
It didn't show up.
Everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's a very interesting discussion, and I was sort of made under the assumption, since we said on the 6th that we would have a vote on the 30th, and so I was sort of proceeding that would be definitely the way that we, what's going to happen. I'm a little surprised about the RIFs, but I would hope that the RIFs could be, maybe people could be made aware of the RIFs, but then the actual RIF wouldn't take place until July 1, And by that time, maybe we would have a passed budget. So it's my understanding that the budget has to be rewarned, which means that we have to do it this week. So we have to put a budget in a warning this week and get it posted if we're going to be voting on it on the 30th of June. So I would hope that that transpired tonight. So thank you.
That's gonna happen. That's the next item on the agenda. But the contract says that if we're not going to give someone a contract, we have to notify them by June 1st. And our vote isn't until June 30th. So it's just a question of how many of those people we're going to have to notify on June 1st, unfortunately. Lyle?
Thanks, David. I just wanted to clear that up. When we notify people that there is a potential for a RIF, they get the RIF letter saying that this would not happen if if a budget is voted and it contains the amount that we have currently posted in the budget, then the RIF would not happen. So our letters are worded so the teachers know that receive the RIF letters that there is the potential, but it's not a guarantee that they're going to be RIFed.
Great, thank you. And Thomas?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm understanding it correctly. We spoke, I think, in the last meeting where if we did get to that 87% figure and we had to borrow, isn't there a finance fee or an interest fee that we would be just losing money towards that would add to what we're losing, basically? Don't we have to, do we have to borrow for like a month, 3 months, the whole year? And then how does that work?
I'm going to let Frank answer that because he'll do it a lot more concisely than I will.
Yeah, the answer is, Thomas, we would borrow until a public vote is passed. And once a public vote is passed and/or the legislature does what maybe Emily Kornhauser had outlined, so one or the other, ultimately we need to borrow until either the electorate passes the budget or the legislature does it on behalf of the budget. And yes, there is quite a cost to doing that. It would not be a matter of, borrowing all of the annual budget up front. What we would do is we would evaluate our cash receipts and then of course our expenditures and borrow that amount as each payroll and as each accounts payable check run, the warrants are scheduled to be dispersed. So I'm in fact right now working on a cash flow forecast, and we'll be providing that to a bank to begin developing a resolution for the board to consider. I hope to have that for the June 17 board meeting. But the bottom line is that as soon as the voters approve the budget, a school tax rate is sent to the tax department through the Agency of Education. They set a tax rate, and that goes to the town offices, and then the normal process goes into effect, where the town offices will pay us the school property taxes that they appropriate, and the education fund will also make their usual payments based on an approved budget.
Did that answer your question, Thomas?
I mean, there are a lot of unknowns. For instance, say it was September 1st. I know, hopefully this won't happen. Say it was September 1st and everyone's in school, and we still don't have anything passed somehow. Would we borrow for the next week at the least, or would it be the next month? Because I guess with our budget, it tends to be about $1 million a week. So right. If we do, say we have to borrow for an entire month at a time, just so we don't run too close. Say that's $4.5 million. how much would that come to hypothetically with something like that? If we had to borrow a month's worth ahead of time, what do you think the loss would be? What do you think?
That could be in a range of say 60 to 80,000, depending on the interest rate.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. Okay, that's terrible. Okay, on top of the cuts. Okay, thank you. Perfect.
And that is why it's so urgent, as David has stressed, that either the legislature takes action or we do, because it's not a good scenario.
Other questions? Okay, we'll move to the vote then. Lyle, you got some information from the Secretary of State today, I hope?
I did not. I contacted him and have not heard back, either by phone, and I left my phone message, or by email. So what we need to do, I think, is we know that in the past, the board has had the authority to accept grants and to do the borrowing. So I don't think that needs to be on a ballot. Frank, is that your understanding as well, that in the past, it seems like boards have done that? And it would just be the regular budget, the language that I sent you, David.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, generally, if a provision in statute is specific about the powers of the school board, then it does not need to also be warned. We've had in warnings across our own districts over the years. Some districts have the article on the warning to authorize the board to borrow in anticipation of taxes. Others have not done that, and I have never seen that challenged by a citizen or by the agency of ed. So in my experience, as long as it's authorized in statute, which it is, board's ability to do a tax anticipation borrowing, it is not required to also be voted.
And we can receive grants and things like that, the other things that we tend to. Oh, great. So, because the only thing in our statute is that the language for the vote of the budget. It doesn't give us any other models that we have to follow or anything else. So, good. That would make it simple.
Do we? I'm just thinking about our traditions, and always good to make sure we check in with Barb. She's our best institutional knowledge. But do we know about the compensation for school boards? I just recall that being somewhat routine on a warning. I don't know what the requirement there is, if it's an annual requirement or not.
I'm sorry, I don't know either. I can ask Barb, and she could put that. Barb put together a draft ballot, which is just the warning, taken from the original warnings that give the exact numbers and percentages for the school budget. If we need to do the school district, the school board salaries, that would be an easy thing to add.
Good. So, so last meeting we had, I believe we had said that we wanted to try to mail a ballot to everyone. And I had some conversations with the Brattleboro clerk, and Sean, I think, has said today that he's talked to all of the town clerks. And I don't know if Barb has contacted any of them about how we might carry out this vote. But so basically, I'm asking for information about, how do we go about this?
Sean, you want to go, and then I can fill in what if I think you've missed anything.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was able to contact all of the town clerks, and I got a tremendous amount of really relevant information on how to do it in light of the pandemic, and also how to do it, as all these different methodologies. So I sort of have written down some of the things that some of the clerks put out there, and they all had good ideas, and they were all, kind of just using all of the ideas and really come up with something that that I think is very workable. So the first item was the fact that there would be a postcard sent to all the registered voters. Actually, I was talking with Barb today, and she said just send it to everybody in the district. So either way, it would be a postcard that would notify people of the importance of the vote, and then also very much the importance of doing it with absentee ballot because of the pandemic, and reducing the number of individuals who would actually come to vote on the 30th of June. Because the polls have to be open. Penny was pretty sure on this and told me that the polls, and actually everybody said this, the polls have to be open on the 30th from 10 in the morning is what Guilford does till 7 at night. But I talked with all the clerks about the possibility of doing that in the safest possible way. Jonathan in Putney said that they could have tents. Brattleboro would use the BOHS gym. I didn't specifically find out from Lori in Numerson, but I think she has an idea, and Penny was going to use the gym in the Guilford school. But I think the point is that we could get maybe 95% of the voting done by absentee ballot. So it would be the postcard. And then Jonathan mentioned something about my voter page, and I looked that up today on the Secretary of State website. So you can request a ballot as soon as the ballots are available directly from the state. Then the state notifies the town clerks. And then Vermont Election Management, Jonathan also cited. So there are these really good tools that can be used in order to pull a vote like this off. So the warning would have to be done next week, and then in the timeline, the vote would need. Let's see. Let me see. Just looking at my notes here. The absentee ballots have to be available 20 days before the vote, so that would be June 10th. So all the ballots would have to be printed and available to anybody that wanted them absentee by June 10th, 2020. And what I can do is I actually I asked every one of the clerks except Penny, and I had a verbal conversation with her, but every one of the clerks sent me a little email timeline list of important details, and I could share that with you, David, and then you could send it to everybody, because it had a tremendous amount of really relevant information within it. So
Yeah, great.
yeah.
The only thing I'll add to that is that Barb and I were talking, and the reason for sending a postcard to everyone is that we were thinking we could have information on the postcard and how people would register to vote if they had not. And then that postcard would give them the information of how to get an absentee ballot, and as I just said, how to register to vote.
Great. Yeah, that sounds great. Sean, did any of them, particularly Hillary and Brattleboro, talk about ballots that could be run through a tabulator so that the Board of Civil Authorities didn't have to handle them?
Yes, Hillary was very keen on that, and I can't remember the specific answer on that from Jonathan or Lori, but I think Penny would use it in Guilford, but we don't have an easily tabulated. In other words, it's not easily programmed, so it would be a little more difficult in Guilford, but it certainly would be something that would be doable. And also, if 90%, 95% of the votes, let's say, or 80% came in as absentee, then that takes that problem off the table. In addition to which, the postcard would have to have specific information for every town member to make sure that all the ballots have to originate from the towns, from one of the 4 towns, and then they'd have to be mailed back to the town clerks. in each of the 4 towns. So if the postcard goes out, it would have to be very specific that it, to the members of the town. So it would almost be 4 postcards for Dummerston, Guilford, Brattleboro, and Putney. And each one of those postcards would be specific return information to those voters in those towns to go back to their own town clerks.
Thank you. Ann Beekman, I saw your hand for a minute.
Sorry, Dave. I have here a communication. It would appear that John from Putney and Herb have been in touch, and John is clear on a touchless system somehow in the parking lot of Putney Central. So that was planned for ahead of time.
Any other, Sarah Coffey's hand was up for a second too. Maybe we covered your concerns. So Lyle, what happens now? Does Barb basically communicate with the, I think we agree. I don't know that we have to vote on it or not, but I think we agree that we want to mail out a notice and then have people request absentee ballots rather than mail ballots to every registered voter, or every current voter. So will Barb work that out with the town clerks?
Generally, she does, yes. It might be good, David, for you and me to see if we can set up a conference call with Barb.
Yeah.
And then, yes, Barb has a really great relationship with all the town clerks, and she generally works with them to make sure that it's easiest for town clerks.
Great. Great. So, yep. Sean, go ahead. It's easier if you put the blue hand up than the little one. You happen to be on my screen right now, but that's not always the case. And you'll have to unmute.
I did talk with Will Senning, and as far as mailing the ballots to everybody, he strongly discouraged that, just as a piece of information directly from Will.
Thanks. So any other thoughts or comments? It sounds like we've got a plan to go forward. So Lyle, we need to warn it within 40 days, but we don't have to have the ballots until 2 weeks ahead?
There are specific dates, so and Barb will know those. I think Sean said maybe we would have to have ballots available at least 2 weeks ahead. If we're going to want to have postcards, I got to pull my calendar out here. We are probably going to want to have postcards ready to mail out so that people have time to get the postcard and then get in touch with their town clerk. So I would guess that first week of June, it will be the latest that we could determine that. And I'm sure Barb will want to send to the people that do our mailings next week, if possible, any information.
Yeah, that would be great. That would give us, we'd have a little bit of breathing space then. Anything else on this topic? Sarah, go ahead.
Sure. In conversation with community members that I've had about this is that if there can be a link to the full budget. I know that the budget packet was made available before a town meeting, but I think that feels like so long ago for many people. So if there's I believe that there's a link to the budget, and just so that voters can also see more detail, if there's a way to add that onto that postcard. That was something that I heard in conversations with a couple of people in Guilford.
Great, thank you. Sean?
Yeah, sorry. I still am under the impression that we have to do a warning no less than 30, no more than 40 days, which means that the warning has to be completed this week. So, because in 30 days, we're starting June 1st, and then we're voting on the 30th. So I think the warning is probably the of utmost importance to get the warning out.
Well, let's see what Lyle has to say.
So we'd have the draft warning
As soon as
done.
possible.
Yep, we have the draft warning
And,
done, and I think it's ready to go, as long as you all approve it tonight. And as I said, I gotta pull it up in front of me. It's the same as what we had in this newsprint. The warning came right from here. So, shall the voters of the school district authorize the school board to expend $51,171,300, which is the amount of the school board has determined to be necessary for the ensuing fiscal year. It is estimated that this proposed budget, if approved, will result in education spending of $18,932 per equalized pupil. This projected spending per equalized pupil is 4.1% higher than the spending for the current year. So that is what Barb put together as a draft warning.
Great, great. Thank you. Other questions? Emily?
Thank you. That reminded me of one thing I wanted to add before I have to leave, and I'm sorry to leave before the meeting ends. I know there's been a lot of confusion and nervousness around the solvency of the Ed Fund, and that was not helped along by the administration's proposal to ask districts to revote last week. And so want to say to all of you and anyone else that's watching that there was absolutely no interest in the House in that proposal of, blanket cuts. And that with regards to property taxes and the Ed Fund, we are in agreement on ways and means that we are going to be setting the yield at exactly what we plan to set the yield at much earlier in the year, pre-COVID, pre the hole in the Ed Fund, and that we will not be filling it via an increase in property taxes, and that we will find another way to solve that challenge. And so just really want to be clear that we're not anticipating cuts and we're not anticipating skyrocketing property taxes. And so as people are making decisions around voting on this budget, that they're aware of that we're really looking to sustain and maintain that stability in our communities.
Great, thank you. Frank?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Emily, we had an update from Brad James that he had heard Ways and Means was considering $10,998 for the yield figure. And you may or may not have those numbers top of your head, but the tax commissioner's letter that the school boards used to develop the budget was $10,883. So just curious if you know which one of those numbers we may be heading toward. And just for the board's point of view, the $10,998 that was shared at our business manager meeting, the statewide business manager meeting, that reflects about a 1% reduction in our tax rate. So that would be favorable, but if we're back to the December 2019 number of 10,883, that's what we published in our annual report, and that's what Lyle just referred to in the warning.
Well, I'm gonna, thanks. We're getting a little bit into the weeds here, and we've got a pretty full agenda, so I'm gonna leave that as it is, and we'll see what happens with the yield. But it's good to know that the governor's trial balloon got punctured by the legislature pretty much immediately. Sean, is it pressing? Because I'd really like to move along.
I was just wondering if you need a motion.
No, I don't think so. I mean, well, it wouldn't hurt. Go ahead, make a motion.
Okay. I would make a motion that the WSESD school board authorize a warning to be produced that Lyle just referenced. And so it would be exactly the same as Article 3 in the warning that was for the meeting on March 17th, 2020, which is the amount of money that will be voted on June 30th.
Great. And we have a second, please.
I second. Liz?
Thank you, Liz. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no blue hands, all in favor, please unmute and say aye.
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 Any opposed? So it is passed. And Jackie, you had your hand up? You have a comment?
No, I hit that button in error. I'm sorry.
Okay. And Wendy, I see your hand up, which means you probably need the text of the motion.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Sean, you want to try it again?
I can just email it to her.
That's even better. Thank you, Lyle.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Next item is the PPE, the Performance and Programmatic Equity Committee report on equity in after-school programming. So I will ask Emily to, I think you are able to share your screen. And yeah, I think I enabled it. There it is. Great. And we'll start off with a brief introduction, and then Liz does the first 4 slides, and I do the next ones, and then we'll go from there.
So I just wanted to make a little statement at first before we just jumped right in, as people may not remember that this topic was on our agenda. And we'll give an overview, or David and Liz will give an overview of how this came about. So I'm not going to steal their thunder. But I just wanted to make a note that we've been working on this since October. And just to give a few thanks, because a lot of the administration, I've emailed them like 1,000 times with probably some silly questions at times to them, because they're kind of in the midst of it and we're a little bit on the side. So I wanted to thank Frank, because he's connected us a bunch to all the numbers you're going to see in the presentation, and Lyle. And then we did talk to a lot of the principals. Steve Perrin's been really helpful, and I know Herb's on the call today, and we've been going back and forth to get some more information about Putney's after school. And then Julian Egan for really rapidly getting me a blurb as of yesterday for the presentation. So it was really great turnaround. And then we talked a lot to Chris Sawyer and Paul Smith, who helped to fill in some blanks. So it was a real community effort beyond our just little, the people who will be presenting tonight. And actually Tim Morris, previous board member, was very involved in kind of before he transitioned off the board in making this come to fruition, or at least, you know, getting all the stepping stones in. So I didn't want to forget people that aren't going to speak, because it's our first attempt to really look at equity or equality of after school programming throughout our district. So we're excited to share this. So I'll hand it over to you, Liz, who has the first slides.
You're going to advance the slides, Emily?
Yeah, you just need to say, because I didn't unfortunately read anybody's notes that they sent to me, I didn't have time, so just say flip when you want me to flip.
Flip.
Oh. Liz, I don't think we can hear you.
Okay. The background of this is, the first thing was how this inquiry came about, and the issue came up around equity in after-school programs when the YSpire didn't renew their contract for FY 2020 with Putney Central and provided very little notice prior to the start of the school year. Due to this, the PPEC was tasked with looking at how after-school programming functioned across the district and if supports were equitable. It's important to note that YSpire is a parent-funded initiative. The scope of this analysis will include comprehensive programming K-12 in all 10 school buildings, including after-school care, summer program, after-school programming, and co-curricular program, which is sports. Next. Our goal during the process was to one, better understand the breadth and depth of after-school programming throughout WSESD and share that information with the entire board. And the second one was attempt to assess equity in after-school programs across WSESD as a means to support future programmatic decision-making and potential expansions while retaining each school's respective community values. Next. So it's structured, the structure of this presentation is after school and summer is the first part. That includes a description of programs, student enrollments, and fiscal data. And the second part is co-curricular athletics programming, which includes descriptions of programs, student enrollments, and fiscal data. And
is that my turn, or is she still on?
I don't know.
I think this is like.
Okay.
So the fiscal analysis includes these are the things that are included: transportation, salaries, benefits, food, official supplies, and equipment. Flip. Yeah, and the funding streams across the district are varied, and this only accounts for items that are in the WSESD district. Externally funded initiatives are outside of our scope. We couldn't get all that information. And if we want to get all that information, we can do a second level analysis to get a little bit more perfectly representative numbers. But so this is based on what we actually spend in our budgets on these programs. Flip. This is my third one. That's the easy one. So the programs in the schools they all started in different ways. The Brattleboro programs began with 21st century school grants in the early 2000s, and as the No Child Left Behind came along, and we were requiring more tutoring, it made sense to offer tutoring after school in the schools rather than hire an outside tutor. So a large number of students were, not a large number, but several students were being tutored, and it became sort of obvious to the board at the time that most of our students were staying after school, and if we could expand the activities gradually over time, we could really create an extended school day. So that's what we attempted to do. The district funds pay for enrichment. It's different in each school. Enrichment, intervention, food connects, summer after school enrichment programs and interventions, and in Green Street 50 after school enrichment programs. And the summer programming was not included because it comes from Title I funds. Dummerston has a Y-Aspire program that's managed by the Meeting Waters YMCA. They do the staffing supervision and take care of all the business of the program. Dummerston also offers one-on-one tutoring for a small number of students. And the Leadership Council is looking into additional after-school programming as something that they see a need for in the community. District funds here pay for the tutoring in the summer school. So flip, please. And Guilford After School Program has been up for 5 years. It's a pre-K through second grade with 17 students providing after-school care. It's not academic. It's because working families asked the board to provide after-school care, and the board saw fit to do so. With summer programming, they now have kids in the Brattleboro Summer School and have for the past 3 years. Before that, there was no summer school in Guilford, and the district funds in Guilford pay for the after-school pre-K to 2 program, including snacks and winter sports transportation. Putney Central has an extensive outdoor education and physical activities programs. Some are run by volunteers, teachers and parents are among them. The programs are funded via the budget, fundraising, and individual payments. Again, lots of outdoor activities, mountain biking, cross country, middle school level sports, and the winter sports program as well. And there's weekly chess club force program when volunteers are available. The summer camps rose out of needs in the community, and the district funds pay the subsidies for summer camps and the pre-K through 5 after school care program. Flip. And I think now it's somebody else.
Is this somebody else, David? I can do it, but I can, oh, okay.
Yeah,
I think because this slide got added in late, so
okay.
maybe it was unaccounted for. But so essentially we also, although the Y Aspire challenges in the fall came up around, you know, elementary schools, some of the elementary schools are also middle schools like Demerson, Putney. So we started to look a little bit at BAMs, and which led us to BUHS and BAMs, because many of the kind of, at least some of the funding streams you'll see in the future were for both schools. So we decided to highlight them here, although it was kind of a side to the study. District funds at BUHS pay for summer school and 65 after-school coordinators. So there's just a diverse amount of activities going on where they need advisors. And for BAMs, it covers the summer programming, some transportation. One is from a bus that we own, the other's not. And then anybody involved in the Brattleboro enrichment or the activities, so the BEAMS program. I should say that the BUHS, technically the after school, some of these after school programs, or the 65 after school programs at BUHS are co-curricular, but we decided to separate them out and put them in this category because, I mean, these seem like what would be called co-curricular, would be called after school activities for the elementary school. So we separated them out and put them here. So a little bit of reorg. Here's some school enrollments. So we're getting into more of the data of the presentation. So these are just some numbers, and you'll see two different numbers. We really struggled when we looked at the student numbers. This is like number, as Judy Normando says, butts and seats. So these are the kids that are actually in the school. And one thing we were worried about is, like, if we just look at the kids who are in the school, then we're assessing equity, we're assessing equality, not equity. And we didn't really have a good way to assess equity. So the only way we could think of, or at least where we had direct access, was to take the weighted student numbers from fiscal year 20 before we merged, because we actually could see by Guilford, by Putney, by a breakdown by schools. And you can see those numbers that were weighted. For Oak Grove, Green Street, and Academy, we only have the combination because those were counted as, like, you know, one little amalgamation of schools. So that you'll see some areas in the budget where we're showing numbers, and we've made note that we can only do a combined number here. We can only do a combined number for BUHS and BAMS because we only have the weighted student number for them together. So you'll see that, but it's just good to explain it here. So here's the amount of after-school budget spent by location. So here is one example where we have the combined budgets, right? We'll break it out in a second, but the total for the district spent on after-school care is $416,154. Now this only includes the things we mentioned a little while ago, which I know you can't switch back to, but all the programs David went through from Putney and Brattleboro and all the other towns, we're just talking about the budget that we have, that the taxpayers pay, not any grants. So this is what would make up that. So here's the budgeted funds by school on after-school programming. So this is the breakdown, not grouped, obviously, all of Brattleboro, right? So you can see Academy, Green Street, and Oak Grove are taken now separately. And everybody has a little bit different budgets. Tried to put in here back to another slide of the student numbers so you can kind of get a feel for, okay, like, it makes sense. Academy has 336 kids, you know, like compared to Guilford, who has 118. Their budget's going to be a little bit bigger. Maybe you'd expect it to be a little bigger than it is. I don't know. But just to kind of give you some data that we collected, and you can kind of start to make your own kind of thoughts about it. Here's money budgeted for after-school programming per pupil in fiscal year 20. So then we decided this was where we needed those weighted. So we decided to look at it. It's like, okay, what does this all mean? Because if you look at this slide, it's like, okay, that's great, but like each school has a different number of students. So how do we actually understand this data? So when we look by students, like, oh, here's how we understand this data. It's like in Town, on average, if you look at the left side bar graph, $142.51 per student. If every student, let's say every student received after school, this is how much would be spent per student. and then Putney, Guilford, Demerson, you can see all the way down. So you can kind of more relate the numbers to how big or small the school is. And these are based on the weighted students. So this is a little bit of the closest we could get at this moment, which we're really taking feedback. So if you think there's a better way that we could have access quickly to, we'll definitely do another analysis. But this was to look at, okay, like since it's a weighted number, it says a little bit about equity, because we know that they're at the state level, they were weighting by school or by town based off of a lot of measures like special needs or students who are in poverty or different kind of measures, students whose families are in poverty. So on the right-hand side, you can see cost per unweighted, because that's the only way we can do it by actual school in Brattleboro. So they're not apples to oranges, or I guess they're not apples to apples, they're apples to oranges on the left graph and the right, but it's interesting to see anyhow. Percent of school site budget dedicated to after school programming. So then we, this isn't with the weights, this is just used fiscal year 20 data again, looking at like, okay, well, when we take the total after school cost and we look at the budgeted cost for that school, what actually, it's a little bit of a value statement, like what percentage did they put into after school? They might have valued something else. They might have put it into preschool or somewhere else, but this is just looking at the after school programmings by site. So you can see like there's a pretty good amount of diversity. There's some schools that have a pretty reined in version of after school, and there's other ones that offer pretty extensive selection, which is really exciting to see. So that's what this shows. I don't want to make too much commentary because I think we can all, I'd like everybody to kind of think themselves and then we can have a discussion. So I think this is you, Tim.
Yep. So we looked at special funds to offset. Things that were considered were the 21st Century Grant, BAMS Beams program, which was taken out of the budget, not included in numbers presented. The special education funding was separated out, as were Title I funds. Things we did not add in were the Brattleboro Endowment, winter sports, volunteering by staff and parents. That's significant. And the fee for service. We included no fees, but did not look into total cost of programming. Next slide. And the fiscal analysis limitations. The data looks, as Emily alluded to, the data looks at after school and summer programming without looking at other prioritized school spending. So as she mentioned, it isn't assessing equity. Instead, it shows what equality would look like. When comparing Brattleboro elementary schools, weights were not used. And that means we're not looking at need, primarily spending by number of students. And we have not taken into account that it is more costly to provide equitable opportunities for students in smaller schools. So the cost of student after school will be likely higher in schools with smaller enrollments, economy of scale. Other questions not that this whole analysis raises include big questions like, what is the academic impact of after-school programs? After doing an analysis, the final question in any kind of research program is so what? So we have these after-school programs. What is the impact on academic learning? How does it benefit students at risk? How does it benefit gifted students? And we are a merged district. Can a merged district reduce costs by sharing resources? I realize this is already done. Oak Grove, for example, sends students to Green Street for some programs like the Jazz Club. Can more of that be done? Should sports be lumped into the same category as rock band and STEM activities and drama club? Should that co-curricular, the sports element, be separately considered? Which raises the question of, big question for me personally, is how do after-school programs reflect the values of our communities and the board? And how do we allocate resources for after-school programs in a fair way? Those are big questions, I think. That's all for me.
Thanks, Tim.
So I am next. Am I still, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. So what's included in co-curricular athletics? We looked at sports programming in grade 7 and 8 as well as high school. And the fiscal data once again includes salaries, benefit, travel, supplies, equipment officials, postseason expenses, FICA fee, intramural expenses, and other incidental costs like ice time. Nothing is weighted, so we can only assess equality, not equity, in a sense. And although the high school budget lists after-school programming under co-curricular, once again, we separated this out and included it in our previous presentation and just focused on athletics. And just a little caveat that Putney Central allows 6th graders to participate in sports on a case-by-case basis, and also that field maintenance is not included. Next slide. So at BUHS, we offer a wide variety of similar and some identical sports programming for both boys and girls, with the exception of football, which we don't offer to girls, and then field hockey, which we do not offer to boys. And then at BAMS, cross-country field hockey, padded flag football, soccer, basketball, Nordic skiing, baseball, softball, track, field, lacrosse, so very similar. Dummerston has soccer, basketball, baseball, and when the numbers allow, softball, and Putney does ultimate frisbee, or is planning to, basketball and soccer, which is already in place. Next slide. So this is the unweighted enrollments by site. Again, just the actual numbers of kids in all the different middle schools. And it doesn't include the 6th graders from Putney, which is just relevant because they are allowed to participate, again, on a case-by-case basis. But since it's case-by-case, adding that data, I don't think would provide much meaningful insight here. But we do have a total of 1,177 kids in grades 7 through 12. And Kelly, did I just blast onto your slide? Did I just keep going?
No.
Okay, next slide.
Okay, so I guess that's me. So the next slide is co-curricular athletics budget by site FY21, and that shows the amount spent on athletic programming per site. Okay, so the next screen. Where am I? Have I gone to the last? Okay. And this one shows co-curricular athletics programming FY20 analysis. This slide shows the amount spent per actual student on per site. These two do not include Guilford in that because their after-school programming has a little bit of athletics, but it's not really tied to this in that way. So next screen. Okay. Percentage of school site budget dedicated to co-curricular athletics programming. This slide shows the percentage of the budget spent on co-curricular athletics programming per site. Next screen. So this screen shows some things that we had talked about, maybe getting some input from the community. So we were looking for requesting further information from the community on to be investigated by the school district, next steps or conversations that should be had, and request for further analysis assistance with decision making. So, and I welcome any input from other board members who can sort of input their recollections of the conversations, but we were essentially recognizing that our presentation did not include everything, and we were looking for acknowledging and looking for information from the community on looking for their input.
Nice. So I guess that brings us to the end here. Thanks, team. And really, we, as we said at the start, and as Kelly just mentioned, we were tasked with figuring out what's going on with after school. And we don't really have an agenda necessarily here to promote after school in some site or do something very specific, but it was an interesting opportunity for the PPEC to take a look and to say, okay, like if we were going to look into some certain content area like after school, or we were going to look into something like preschool, let's say a bunch of people wanted preschool or a bunch of people wanted a certain thing, or we're asking questions about, how come this one has that, and these kind of questions that come up, we'd need a way to start to look at that consistently over time. So this was our first attempt, and as Kelly said, like there's probably a lot of things missing, but we wanted to open up to the board and to the community who's on the call and the administrators to say, like, what do you think? Do you have questions? Where does this leave us? And what next steps, what next steps might exist around after school programming, maybe not right this second when we're really dealing with a ton of budget crunch, but in the future, like what does this mean for us now that we've done this analysis? And I can definitely flip back and forth to any slides people need to see again because it's kind of dense. So I'll open it up.
Jody, I'm gonna I see that you raised your hand. I got a message. See if I can change that.
Yes, I did, David. I thought when you were starting to do this program, which I found was very interesting as far as it went, but I thought there was going to be a proponent of it that did girls versus boys in high school.
What do you mean by that? Like, can you say a little more? You mean sports?
Yeah, how much money, how much equipment, how much field time, how much all of that, boys and girls.
So we're doing that in a separate analysis. So we're doing actually they both came from a different area. So like that conversation came from a little bit of the conversation around the sports fields, it evolved from there. This one was happening concurrently around after school. So actually the decision to include sports was a lot later in this presentation because we realized the budgets were so intertwined, especially in the middle schools. So we added it in here, but there will be in the future information out about, a little bit more data regarding kind of that equity and gender. But that wasn't this one was a look at equity specifically for K-8, which doesn't really have the same gender. I don't know if we have issues, but if it had an issue, it wouldn't be a gender issue. Does that make sense?
Yep. Okay. Thank you. I'd like to see it when you get it done.
And that's on on the PPEC's agenda. Next time we'll be talking, Chris Sawyer and Steve Perrin are coming to answer some of our initial questions around that. So just to let you know.
Okay. Jody, your hand is still up, but I think you're done. Or do you have more to say? Okay. Any other questions or comments or suggestions for the committee? Okay, well, we have this data now, and we don't really, we're not really planning any actions based on it, other than if things changed or if somebody had specific questions that they came up with, it would work with that. But so we'll post this slideshow on the website, and then people can go back at their leisure and view it and kind of think about it and figure out if there's anything you'd like us to do or any questions that came from it.
I do have one thing I want to say,
Yes,
David.
yep.
Just as like a preponderance, because we've all been talking on the committee and we can still keep talking about this. And as I said, there's really no funds for additional things right now, but you know, questions have come up on the committee about, like, when you look back at this data, what are we trying to do? If we were going to have some proposals that came in around any issue, especially now we're saying after school, but what are our value statements? Because a lot of where we spend our money is what we value. So we're responsible as a board for also kind of making some decisions about that. So maybe it's a time during our summer retreat, which I don't know how will happen, but maybe online, you know, what do we think about these things? And let's say a school came to us that didn't have a lot of after school program. We heard from Oak Grove a little while back, and they were saying, oh, like, could we have more? You know, we have the data now to say, like, okay, well, what do we think about that? What does more mean? What is, you know, how do we move around the budget in a smarter way than just, you know, throwing money at everything? And obviously we get the advice of administrators and we'd have to dig a little deeper, but I do want to encourage people, you know, if issues come up, like, we have to have a way to think about our district together. So that's my last piece. And I guess we'll talk about a follow-up on our committee meeting. Thanks, David.
Sure. I think the only thing I would add to that is we have to look, as you just said, we have to figure out how to look at the districts together. At the same time, I'm really gratified that there's so much difference in what happens in the school buildings, because we hear about that. We know that there are different values and different things emphasized in different buildings, and that's reflected particularly in these activities. Mm-hmm. And so it's fascinating that we can't really get to equity, and it's not about equity, it's really about what makes the most sense in these cultures with the student body that they have. And I see that Mark Spino and then Ellen Tumovicius are here too. Mark?
Yeah, thank you. I'll just say that each school in our school district is unique and does have its unique climate. And, you know, I think our school budgets reflect our values. And that's our job as administrators each fall, to build a budget that reflects and supports what each school site values and is working on as a goal.
Thank you. Ellen?
I don't know if this is an appropriate time to ask, but I think it is, since you're talking about the sports and after-school programming. And I'm curious, with all this budget madness, where are we at with the artificial turf? And was that just put aside for next year, or is that still in the budget?
There's a study still underway. It was obviously things slowed down, and it's happening in a different process. And I expect that we'll get a report, and we're supposed to get a recommendation and then decide where to go from there. There is still in the capital plan and in the budget $125,000 this year to do something to improve the fields. But, yeah, that's not part of this. Julianne?
Just to follow up on Emily's question, in terms of, you know, thinking as a district, I think particularly for the smaller schools, is just looking at that problem around economy of scale, you know, and how do we think creatively about how we can give students at schools like Oak Grove and Guilford and Dummerston the same kinds of opportunities that students have at other schools, creative staff sharing or transportation solutions would be really good to look at. I know traditionally Dummerston it's just been hard to fund an independent right after school program at a small, you know, at that small scale.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments? I want to thank the committee and especially Emily, the chair. Oh, Michelle does have a comment. Go ahead, Michelle.
I'm sorry, was there in your numbers there, did you have a slide that showed us the actual number of students participating? I think you did. Could you share that again? If you could, if it's easy.
So can you hear me?
Yeah.
So did you mean, so we didn't have a slide on the actual number of students participating, but we had the actual number of students that are like in the school.
Okay.
Do you want, is that relevant to you?
I don't know. I think I find myself very curious about just what the community feedback about what they feel like are working, what's working, if their needs are being met in their schools, what they wish they had. And I get that that's a really hard thing to navigate and fill need versus desire. So I was just curious, with these different, let me see what I'm looking at here.
So this is, I mean, we have a few different slides. This is just the number of students in each of these schools. And we have another slide over here that's like with BAMS and BUHS.
Okay.
Now it doesn't say anything, it's like not the level of analysis we did. It doesn't say anything about, like, for example, there are a lot of kids who participate in sports at BUHS. So I know that the sports numbers are actually a little easier to get because like a team has 16 people. It's very easy to calculate that versus how many kids are in the chess club each year. It might vary. But it isn't to say, like, the reason I bring that up is because we can know the number of kids, but it's not unique kids who are in the sports programs. Kids could play multiple sports. Kids could be in multiple clubs. So we didn't have a good way to say, like, okay, is this our after schools program serving our 5% of our kids? Or is this 50% of our kids? Our sports programming, like, just for 4% or 30%? We don't know. We just know how many kids are in the school. I mean, I think we could eventually get those numbers. It would just involve a little bit more, it would involve more work. And I think it might be, some of the numbers might be hard.
This seems like a really good foundation and starting point. So thank you guys for all this work and sharing with us.
Thanks, Michelle. Any other questions or thoughts, or anyone want to share anything about the report, or any advice for what the it's not like we don't have things on the list already, but what the PPEC might other things you might want to look into now that you've seen the quality of the work that Emily and team are able to put together. Tim's got an idea.
Well, no, not an idea. Just another question. I just really wonder if there's a halo effect. If kids who participate in after-school programs do better in their regular day classroom. We seem to value after-school programs, but I want to know why we value them. What their purpose is, and they're so disparate. You have so many different kinds of after-school programs. How do we measure their effect? That's a burning question for me. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I think measuring the effect it'd be hard to get a control group and hard to measure what that particular activity has. But I think in general, we know that having kids engaged in any system, really, it's more effective. There are multiple points of contact. The person's going to be more engaged and more involved and likely to perform better. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a principal or two out there who would like to talk a little bit about the value of the after. Oh, there's one, Mark.
Yeah, about 4 years back, we made a calculated decision to shift from after-school tutoring to focus on increasing student engagement. And what that meant was to offer, unique enrichment opportunities for every student in the school. So we moved from tutoring specific students who we identified to embracing a culture of enrichment for all and creating opportunities for all of our students. And our engagement through participation quadrupled. It's been huge for us.
Thanks, Mark. Herb?
Yeah, thanks. Much like Mark, we still do individual tutoring. It's funded primarily via Title I funds. But really the approach we've taken with our after-school programming has more to do with buttressing social emotional well-being of the kids so that they do feel those connections and have an opportunity to participate in activities with adults who generally are school people during their day in ways that they don't ordinarily have a chance to do during the school day. And it pays big dividends, which I think, David, you mentioned it's difficult to sort of sometimes measure these things, and I agree. But in general, it has a very positive impact on overall.
Thank you. Steve?
We also did a couple of studies a few years ago where we looked at the impact of sports on student academic averages and achievement. And we found a pretty significant correlation between a student being involved in sports and being successful in high school. We then tracked the same thing with music and kids involved in our musical program. We found the same thing, and it was kind of interesting. We found that the semesters that kids were doing the musical, they actually had higher grade point averages than the semester they were not. And then, overall, it's pretty clear that, being involved and having the opportunity to do sports clubs and any co-curricular really promotes for a student, especially a high school student, a sense of belonging in their school, especially in a community and in a world where that is kind of fractured elsewhere. And, we also have a lot of anecdotal evidence that shows that a lot of our kids who may leave high school without getting a diploma actually stay in school because they have access to sports, a strong sense of belonging. They have great role models in their coaches, and they don't drop out of school. So,
thanks, Steve. Kelly?
Hi, thanks. You asked about the purpose, and really, I think at Academy and in Bratttown Elementary, I would say that I would echo what's been said, and also say that it's about exposure to new things that they haven't tried before. A lot of social emotional learning happens during these times. The kids develop relationships with different peers who are not in their grade level, and they may not otherwise meet them. And that goes for staff as well. Different staff run the programs for different grade levels of students. So it makes transitioning to the next grade easier for them because they've met the teachers. They get opportunities to exercise instead of sometimes going home to, they may not be able to get outside where they live, or they might not have an adult home with them. And it also engages the parents and informs the community about our school's values, because they learn what's important to us. For example, we did a sign language program this year, and we have some students who are deaf, and the classes filled up almost instantly. And unfortunately, we had to turn some kids away, but we were able to do another session, and parents got really interested in it. And so it does, like Steve said, really build the sense of community and culture and belonging for all kids.
Thanks, Kelly. Ruby?
Hi, Ruby McAdoo with Putney. I am really happy that the PPEC is doing this, and I commend you. It's great. And I had two things to say, and one was that although I understand the need and a little bit of the desire to look at what's actually budgeted, I do feel like, particularly in Putney, there are so many things that are not budgeted and are supported by outside organizations that or are self-funded, and so I think that for our town, at least it feels like, we wouldn't be all of these questions about the impact of after-school programming and how that translates to the values that are in our budget. I think there's some work to be done to figure out that equity piece, because I appreciate and think that we aren't all going to be the same beautiful flower. We're going to be a whole garden of flowers. But I think this is a really good first step to those questions. The second thing I just wanted to comment on is that I was one of the parents who was affected by the closure of Y Aspire in Putney. And so this, when this first got raised, I was one of the vocal parents who was upset by the fact that my kids needed somewhere to be while I was at work. And it was great when they were learning something that was engaging, but actually I just needed them to be occupied. And I didn't have that option. And it was distressing to me that there was no There's no way to get it. And Herb ended up pulling it together. It was a lot of work. He found it's something that, you know, he pieced it together and created a program, and that was great. But I think that there's I want the board to be mindful of the people in the community who utilize after bell programming that is till 5 till 6 o'clock, not necessarily thematically driven, not necessarily, you know, chess club or sports, but really as a tool for working families. I think that needs to be prioritized in a way that I didn't feel that at the beginning of this last school year in Putney when Y Aspire pulled. And so I would just remind that committee and the board that although all of these conversations around after school programming and how they affect our kids and how they're learning and what kind of impact that is, I think there is a family need around having aftercare support for the families, not just for the kids.
Thanks, Ruby. I think that's a really good explication of how much more broadly we are now and are going to have to continue to look at what schools do. It's way out of our control at this point. But thank you. John Gagnon.
Yes, I just wanted to echo a little bit about what was just previously said in terms of the importance of childcare for working families. You know, the genesis of Guilford having an after-school program did come directly from the need of the community for some kind of childcare in town for working families. And if you look at the numbers, it is, because of our small size, it is quite expensive for us to run a program. What our program doesn't do is it doesn't provide the opportunities for enrichment and for cultivating that sense of belonging throughout the entire school. So when we think about creating opportunities for all, I want to echo a bit of what Julianne said earlier in terms of thinking of us as a system, and that we are looking at the needs of all of our children, and how can the small schools be kept in the equation. And we look for efficiencies as well as opportunities and increased equity for all of our children.
Great. Thank you, John. Tim Maciel.
Just thank you for all those great responses to what the purpose of the after-school programs was. That was inspiring. I have one specific question. One of the slides showed the average per pupil cost. Why is Putney at 766 and BUHS at 822? Why is that significantly higher than other elementary schools for Putney?
Which slide are you talking about, Tim?
The average per pupil cost for after school, showing Putney at 766 and BUHS at 822.
Couple down.
Oh, it's a couple down. Are you talking about for sports?
Was it sports?
Yeah. So
here
Putney,
it is, yeah.
Yeah, Putney has, you're saying why is it 766 and BUHS is at 822?
Why is Putney significantly higher than Dummerston, for example?
Oh, so the reason there is because one, it's interesting, like as you have even just 6 students fewer, the number rapidly increases because the numbers are so small for their sports programs. So that's one reason. The other reason is I think it was officials was a good amount higher at Putney for their after school programming. And I can pull up my little data set as other people ask questions and get back to you on the actual number. But there was I wrote a little reasoning for it. So can you hold it and then have somebody else go and I'll tag back on?
No, that's okay. That's fine.
Okay.
Let's see, Kelly again. I'm sorry I unhanded you, Kelly. I thought you didn't turn yours off when you actually turned it on again. Go ahead.
That's okay. I just wanted to speak quickly to Ruby's point. Ruby, I totally get it and agree with you. I have my own child who I also need aftercare for, and I was lucky enough to get her into Aspire, but I think there is a broader issue as well that sort of plays into equity, but it's also just a district-wide issue in terms of the capacity for schools to keep kids longer versus the needs of working parents. And our after-school programs only run until, a little bit after 4 o'clock anyway. And for a lot of parents, they need care until at least 5 and a lot of times 6 o'clock. And the Aspire slots are filled so fast. Like right now, they're already filled for next year. So all of the incoming kindergarten parents, for example, it's hard to get your shot to sign up. So I've thought about this a lot, and I realized that the board may not be able to solve this, but it's worth thinking about as a town and a district of how could we have a facility that could have a bigger capacity for kids to go there. I've looked at the old Home Depot place next to Hannaford a lot of times thinking, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could have a YMCA in town where all of our kids could take the bus and be there until parents pick them up. So just kind of food for thought. It's kind of like an aftercare versus the programming issue. And how do we provide the care for everyone who needs it?
Thanks, Kelly. Liz.
Yeah, Herb, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have one either the 7th or the 8th grade class is very, very small. Is that true?
Yeah. Actually, it is. It's the smallest class we've had since I've been at PCS for 10 years. So we've got 11 kids graduating. The largest class that we've had, I think 5 or 6 years ago, we had 33 kids. So we are in a rebuilding phase with the 6, 7, 8 middle school. We've got 36 graders coming up. So that number is going to leaven out substantially when we get back to school in the fall. But you're correct, it is a small class.
Great, thank you.
So that affects what the sports is costing.
Thanks. Andy Skarzinski, you had your hand up at one point. Did you change your mind?
I lowered it. My comment was answered. I'd like to thank you for all the effort that was placed into that report. After school activities are critical to the life force of the school, and you tend to see those results that borne out in climate surveys and culture surveys and buildings. And I think the schools have all labored tremendously hard to build unique programs that fit their populations and their needs. And I'm looking forward to seeing all the great programs that have been developed at all the elementary and the middle and the high school.
Thanks, Andy.
Just to get back to Tim's comment for a second. So Tim, I don't have a good response. I'm going to say that right off the bat. I have to look back in the emails because it was something that I went back and forth with Frank about. And I have the budget breakdown, but I can send that to you after. But I mean, the blanket response is that Putney Middle Schools, you can see their spending for sports is higher than Dummerston. I don't know why. Maybe it's an official's cost. I just can't determine at this moment why. I'm sure there's a really valid reason, but when you divide that by 30 students and you divide a smaller number by 36, it ends up being a lot higher of a number, per pupil. And it could be related to the fact that, Putney said they had the small class, maybe they had more students before, therefore more budget. I don't know the inner intricacy, but I will, I'll loop back in an email with you, and we can discuss it also on the PPEC if people have other questions. Sorry, I can't be more helpful.
Okay, any more thoughts? Well, thank you again for presenting this, and I'm feeling several pounds lighter now that we've started talking about working with kids and why we do things that we do and the importance of them and how much more we have to be doing. It's just such a relief from talking about budgets and votes and legislation. And, my mood is greatly improved. So thank you very much. So next is the administrative report. Lyle's going to give us an update, and I have a little information to go along with that. And then I think Andy is going to talk about summer actions and getting ready for next year.
So distance learning is continuing. Teachers are doing an amazing job with this. And just still considering the fact that basically they all had to turn on a dime and change their methods of teaching. So in my report that I sent to you all, we're continuing to work with families that were having some issues reaching. And as the weather gets warmer, continuing to review offline options to get students off screens and doing some other projects. Andy's working with Deb, Paul, and the administrators to look at online options that are working well. And I think Andy can report out on that in just a minute. I put in all the end dates. June 5th will be the last date of new learning. June 12th, the week of June 8th through 12th will be a week of either makeup time or school-based themes or catch-up time. And then that last week will be devoted to professional development and times for teachers to end the year with summary reports, etc. Andy, Deb, Cardane, Paul Smith, administrators are going to be working with Andy Skarzinski on what summer learning might look like. We've had a lot of conversations around summer learning. What will be safe for us to provide, if it will be safe for us to provide any in-person. Right now, we don't know the answers to a lot of those questions. One of the things that we've talked about quite a bit is whether or not we'll be able to provide protective equipment for the start of school. And if we are able to get protective equipment, we don't want to use so much of it in providing summer opportunities that we're taking it away from what we would need in the fall. So there are a lot of things that we have to keep in mind when we're thinking about summer learning, but those plans are still being worked out. And food, we're trying to work out through a grant to pay for transportation for food throughout the summer. We are feeding, as you know, about 3,100. We're making about 3,100 meals a day. That's a lot of food for a lot of families. They're relying on us, so we're really hoping that we can get some more money to continue that level of service throughout the summer as well. In the notes, you'll notice I have a couple of resignations and one new hire that I'd like you to accept. Kayla Wood, the Guilford phys ed teacher, has resigned and taken a job further north. She was offered a full-time position and did not have a full-time position with us, so we wish Kayla well. Kathy Forrester, the Career Center nursing teacher, has decided that she is going to retire. So those are two resignations. And Mary Kaufman would like to offer Allison Paquette the Oak Grove academic support position. So if you could move those, I would appreciate it.
Okay. Could I have a motion, please, to accept with regret resignations of Kayla Wood and Kathy Forrester?
So made.
Thank you, Tim. Second?
Second, Emily.
Thank you, Emily. Any discussion?
I have a question.
About the hirings or about Lyle's report?
About Lyle's report.
Okay, we'll do that after the motions. Okay, Tim?
Okay.
Great, thanks. Any discussion of the motion? Hearing none, please unmute and in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. And could I have a motion, please, to hire Allison Paquette for the Oak Grove academic support position?
So moved.
Thank you, Jackie. Second, please.
Second.
Thanks, Liz. Moved by Jackie and seconded by Liz to approve the hire of Allison Paquette. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion passes. Okay, Tim.
Okay. I have a question, Lyle, about food. I think it's fantastic that so many students' families are being fed. But would the meals are prepared, would we get much more out of our food budget if we simply gave families food that's not prepared as meals to let them cook it?
That I don't know if we would be allowed to do that. It's something I can look into and find out, but we have very specific guidelines that we must follow, put out by the, it's probably the feds that give us those guidelines, because that's where we're getting a lot of money from. And we also have to consider the fact that we're sending this food to sometimes kids who are home alone and their parents may not want them preparing food. Possibly there could be situations where there may not be electricity in the home. So in order to ensure that kids have food that they can eat, I suspect we will continue with preparing and cooking the food.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to let the board know about a possible opportunity that may come our way with a little bit of effort. One of the things that COVID has really reinforced for us is the truth we've seen over and over again about our less affluent students facing more obstacles and having fewer opportunities than their peers. And that's been really evident with remote learning. And we have an opportunity right now to remove a significant obstacle in our towns. There's a significant amount of grant money that's come to the state. And it's very limited in terms of what it can be used for, but among the uses are running infrastructure and connections to homes and actual equipment for students who are underserved or not served. And it also includes teachers. They're also asked to, can be part of it. And so I've been following this pretty closely in the legislature, and then the governor just made some recommendations today, which didn't include much from broadband, but the legislature has as usual, has a different perspective. But the point is that we have a fiber cable company wiring Chesterfield right across the river. And we also have, we know where our underserved people are. And if we can get that information and contact, but I actually contacted Consolidated, I haven't heard back from them yet. But if we can get some information, get the addresses of the people that we know, the children we know are underserved, and start talking with Consolidated about putting together a proposal, we could be the first ones in line for that money. And it would enable the running of fiber optics from all the way down the road to the house at the end, where if that's where the family was that needed the service, and anybody else along the line, along the way could use it. They're not putting restrictions on how it can be done. It's really quite an amazing opportunity. There's going to be a lot of competition for the money, but unless they change the restrictions, and the Congress doesn't seem to be in the mood to change the restrictions. They might extend the deadline, but it's $1,250 million that have to be spent between now and January 1st. And so I think it's a pretty good chance that we could get a chunk of that and get all of our families wired with really more than adequate broadband service. So, but we need to collect the addresses of the students. So I wanted to suggest or get the boards to see if the board agreed to add yet more to the plates of our staff by asking the teachers to record the names of the students that they know are underserved. They're the ones that are on the ground. They know who these people are. The 911 service doesn't know it. None of the agencies of the state know it. Only our teachers know that. and to get those names, and then to not to share those names, but to look up their addresses. Not the teachers, obviously. The office staff would look up the addresses and then put those addresses together and work with Consolidated to see what the proposal would be and what the bid would be to provide those services. So I wanted to. It needs to happen fairly quickly, and in order for us to stay ahead of the curve. So I wanted to put that information out there and just get some response from the administration and from the board as far as whether we support trying to pursue that pretty vigorously. Frank?
Yeah, I had mentioned this to Paul Smith, that, you know, it's an initiative that potentially might be available to us. And he has indicated that he already has that data as a result of working with Lyle and our teachers. So we do have that data. I also reached out to the legislative chair that you mentioned, David, and asked if they had a specification or, you know, anything that we could work with to you know, to take advantage of it. So I hope to hear back from him soon. And just one other angle that we might want to consider is, you know, typically school districts don't do infrastructure to a private home. You know, typically that's something that a town would do, but if the funding opportunity utilizes the school district as sort of the agent, you know, we certainly would love to work either way, with the town or independent of the town, to try to address that kind of infrastructure investment. And then, of course, we have to be mindful of, once it's in there, who pays for it, you know, who pays for the service. Typically, again, we don't pay for private use services, but you know, I agree, it's a lot of money, and it would make a huge impact on a number of our families. So I will definitely stay on top of it.
Yeah, great. Yeah, the question I specifically asked Brigland is the school district the kind of municipality that could actually contract with somebody to do that work? And the other thing, the paying for service, I mean, that may be like after school care. It's just one of the things that we're going to have to provide if we're going to provide equity. It's, you know, will wind up being in our budgets. We don't know. I don't know that, but we're already giving, you know, sending Chromebooks home with kids. And so, great. That sounds terrific. My only question is, Paul had sent me the numbers that he had, and I don't know if those were, if teachers were specifically asked to give the exact numbers of kids that they knew had inadequate service or not. So just to double check and make sure we have everybody, if that's possible. Herb, you had your hand up for a sec.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate at least a piece of what Frank said, and you just covered it with the fees. You know, running lines out to the rural areas is a terrific idea. Paying for the service is quite another thing. We've experienced that with 2 or 3 of our families who had access, whose service was cut off because they weren't able to keep up with their bills. We managed through private funding to take care of that, but it's going to be a recurring concern.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions for Lyle, or any comments or other questions around the progress so far? Okay. Andy, would you like to talk about your plans for getting us back to school?
Yeah,
and also any summer plans?
Well, we have a few things in the works right now, and as you know, we will follow the guidance from the Department of Public Health, the Agency of Education, and working in conjunction with the Vermont Superintendents Association for guidance both regionally and across the state level in terms of what reentry looks like. As we've looked at things, one of the documents that's been incredibly helpful is just a generalized framework from the Council of Chief States school officials. And within that document, they look at really 4 four components of a framework that we're going to organize our work around going into the next school year. One is around continuity of learning, the other around conditions for learning, leadership and planning, and the fourth one we don't have as great of an impact on that as around policy and funding. And the policy component will really dictate some of the, how we're able to, manage coming into the school year. As we spoke with our administrators last week and gave them an update, and I'll be sending this out to our faculty, we're looking at a range of options for reentry. Those range of options goes all the way from a full return to normal operations, which we know is probably unlikely, to having some level of a hybrid design where there are some students in the building and other students conducting learning remotely, and as well as and then looking at a fully remote learning environment. We do anticipate within any of those models that there may be some prolonged closures again related to an outbreak, whether it's at a single school or whether it's across the district. And so this is some of the work that we're trying to focus our professional development around. As we've discussed and as I've spoken with the leadership team, who have been incredibly helpful and resourceful in what they've done throughout the course of this year as this quick ramp up to remote learning is taking place. We've shared the first phase of getting everything up and going was incredibly challenging, and it's left some teachers and some staff feeling as if they need a greater level of support and understanding around remote learning. So as we think about the summer, we're at the end of the school year work, planning into the summer, we will be talking about really considering and contemplating our initial planning of looking at what would it look like to be fully remote at the start of the school year. By doing so, we're able to then backfill in both a hybrid model and some level of students moving in and out of the school at different time periods. And by utilizing a remote approach, we're looking to establish what's the baseline and kind of the initial framework that needs to be put into place for all students so that they have what we'd call an equitable experience across the district. And so as we've talked about other items with our leadership team, one incredibly important aspect around all of this work is making sure that students feel safe and secure. As you can imagine, schools are the one, for many of our students, it's the one place in our children's lives that's consistent and it's always present. Creating that remotely is difficult. It's possible, but that's an aspect of the work we'll be discussing with the group. The second part that we would like to talk about with our teachers, and Paul and Deb are working with this as well, is having a consistent set of digital tools across all the buildings at each grade level. So that in that way, it allows familiarity for students that may be transient, that may move from one space to another. They would have some degree of familiarity between school environments. And as well, it would give teachers a level of colleagueship where they can talk with colleagues from building to building, but it would also allow us to leverage best practices and identify problems and address challenges as a unit, as a unified group, instead of kind of in singular spaces. And so that's the big thrust of the work. As we look into the summer, the learning challenges are one thing. We'll consider also looking into the logistical challenges around bringing students back in at different points and what that would happen to be. As Lyle mentioned, we're not entirely sure the access to PPE will be readily available. And as we have our initial planning, that's something that we have our eye on. That's something we're continuing to look at. And that level of procurement, that's one of the level of strategies that we're looking to address early on. And many of the nurses have already started together to create a procurement list to find those items that would need to be in place for school to reopen in the fall.
Yeah, it's definitely, you can't get a forehead thermometer. Nobody has them in stock. They're simply not available right now. It'd be impossible to operate without those. But any thoughts or questions for Andy? Liz?
Yeah, if a family has family members who are at very high risk and for complications or death from COVID. In all of the scenarios that you're looking at, would there be an allowance for that family to not send the child to the school?
We would look for guidance from the AOE and the Department of Public Health regarding those unique circumstances. That's a policy component that we would want to look for guidance from what the state is saying around that. I'm sure that the schools are flexible places and we work to meet the needs. I have to emphasize that the safety and security of our students, staff, all the building occupants and our families is our priority right now. And so any plan would involve that. The last thing we would want to do is risk an exposure to anyone, let alone someone that may be medically fragile or have a high exposure risk. And so in the contemplation of what these things look like, those are all considerations.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for Andy or Lyle?
I have a question, David.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not on the screen for the handhold thing.
Okay.
I just forgot my question. Oh, I know what the question was. So when you're thinking about this either phased reopening or reopening, not with all the students coming back, I might have missed this if you said it, but are there any thoughts about what I can imagine? Like my mother's actually a preschool teacher, and she's like, I can't imagine having preschoolers, they're not going to wear masks. It's going to be kind of like really messy for preschoolers compared to what schooling might look like for ninth graders who are, much more responsible for their own bodies, or aware, I should say. So when you're thinking about this, it's very early on, but what are your thoughts about different approaches to different grade levels?
We would seek feedback from the principals and the school leadership around how they would best approach each unique grade level. I don't know, Emily, after working in I've worked pre-K through 12, and I will say some of our pre-K kiddos may respond better to wearing a mask than some of our high school students that I've worked with.
Maybe so.
I'm a sympathetic spouse of a high school teacher, so I know some of the juggling that goes on there. I think we would look to our school-based leadership to find that what are the best ways to implement that in each of the unique settings. As a country, we don't have a great culture of compliance anyways, and so working around those items and making sure that we're reinforcing safety for all. As I've said before, safety is a priority, and making sure that we're reinforcing safe approaches to things. Within the logistical piece, also, we would have to look at a high degree of cleaning throughout the day, and both at the start of the day and at the end of the day. And so those are also the other logistical challenges that influence things. And to have from my limited exposure to the schools, they all seem incredibly clean and managed. But the standard of care in the building would have to be much higher than even what I've already seen that's in place.
Thank you.
Other comments? Thoughts? Yes, Molly.
Hi. I just had I had a thought, because I've been reading a lot about colleges since I have a college-age student. And I know that several of the colleges are adjusting their calendars to try to condense learning on the early end, front-loading the learning, and then having an extended break at the time when flu season hits, and they're projecting the coronavirus might also hit again. So I just wanted to put that out there as a thought. I don't know how that would work in our school system, but it was interesting to me. It got me intrigued today, and yeah, and I know there are implications. I wear a union hat too, so there are implications for the calendar with the union. So I would just put a plug in to have any communication about that with us as well. Thanks.
Thank you for that.
Thanks, Molly. Ruby?
I just wanted to ask, I see on the agenda that there's a role of leadership councils under this agenda item, and I wanted to kind of understand what the thinking was there.
Yeah, I've got some things to say about that. I just wanted to hear from everybody else first. So, other comments or questions for Andy or Lyle? Well, one of the reasons that I read those, went through the policies I went through at the beginning of the meeting is because with the focus on parents and community engagement is because the steering team, which is a group of people that volunteered at our first meeting, at our organizational meeting in the gym on the first or second day of the closed school season. A group that I could contact to kind of go through some ideas with and to discuss some questions and things that to bring up with the board and the administration. And this week I asked them to get together, or last week, to get together and talk about leadership councils. And with really excellent conversation. And one of the things that became really clear is that the councils that have been going for a while, Guilford and Putney, are really pretty sophisticated and are really having some pretty valuable conversations. And then Sean, who's been on school boards now for 16 or 17 years, or maybe I'm making you older than you are, Sean, but he talked about how rewarding and thrilling it is to meet and have these quality of conversations with people from the community and the staff and the administration. And I was asking about that in the context of the summer planning and the changes that we're going to have to develop, and the work that the leadership teams and the building leadership teams are going to, that Andy talked about, they're going to have to be doing. And then the importance of having that informed by community members and staff, and as Molly just pointed out, and parents. And that's why we created that leadership council structure. And we talked a long time about why they didn't get set up and why they aren't all running as well as Guilford and Putney. And part of the reason is that we didn't have 10 people, so we didn't have somebody for every council to get them set up. But now we have assigned people to the councils. And it seems like that's the format or the structure that we need to have in place through the rest of the school year and through the summer, to inform the administration and to really participate in this planning, set up some sort of a communication system so that the parents and community members who are engaged and who are in touch with the community and who can inform this process can do so. Molly's example just a few minutes ago was a really good example of an idea that, coming from a parent who has a kid in college and has this other way of looking, a new idea to think about. And it's really important that this not be administrators in the summer in their school buildings trying to figure out how it's going to work for everyone, because that's not going to work. The range of need and the diverse situations that we're going to be faced with next year, we have to know as much of that ahead of time as possible to not have it be a real disaster. So I would like to with the board's approval, ask that with the board members voluntarily joining the principals in the schools that they've signed up with to convene the councils that have already have members, and for the schools that don't have the membership all set up, to do that, to get that work done, for the staff to identify a couple of teachers to serve, and for teachers or administrators or both to contact parents and get those councils up and running by the end of next week, certainly before we're done with school, and get those things functioning so that we're used to talking to other people than just ourselves in terms of how this is all gonna unfold and how we're gonna find our way back to whatever school is in the next year. And the other thing that that the steering team mentioned in particular was that some of our schools have a significant number of students of color, and we all have students with receiving special services. And so I would ask that those councils with students of color and all the councils reach out and see if they can get some parents of those children to join the council so that those voices are heard and are in the process. The electronic meeting, it makes people a lot more convenient. In a lot of ways, it's easier to meet. I know there's a lot of work going on, and you know, we're trying to graduate people and figure out grades and all the stuff that has to go on at the end of the year. But if we don't take advantage of this structure that we put in our articles, and that everybody, whether they like merger or didn't like merger, agreed with something that needed to happen, and now we've got the structure in place and we need to implement it. So I would like to hear from the rest of my board about what they think about moving in that direction and making it a new level of commitment to setting up the other the other 8 leadership councils that haven't, or 7, I guess, because Dummerston's a meeting, but we just haven't had reports from them. But set up the rest of those councils and get them going. And Nancy, I'll work with you to find some parents and get your board functioning too. So any thoughts, responses from anybody on that little tirade or whatever you call it?
I think it's a great idea. I'm going to move on it.
Thank you, Tim. Emily?
Yeah, I'm ready to work. I'm on Academy, so I'm ready to work with Kelly. I'm looking forward to that. So
great. Jackie?
I just sent Mark an email.
Great. I think one of the problems that we may, Ann?
The Career Center Regional Advisory Board is scheduled a meeting for June 2nd.
Oh, great. Great. Could you send me that, send that to me, please?
Sure.
Thank you. One of the problems that we may face is teachers don't necessarily have to work in the summer. So I don't know how, if it might be possible to get COVID funds for stipends for people, and the same thing, COVID funds for experts to come in and advise in terms of how to, you know, some of the social emotional stuff that's going on. I assume that the administrators are looking into those opportunities already. Unless I know the agency hasn't given a lot of information yet, but we know that we're going to need that. But the other thing we have is the 1% funds, which we might be able to use as stipends for teachers to be on the leadership councils through the course of the summer if that's necessary. But we'll find a way to make it palatable to them as well. No other comments? No other thoughts? Okay, well, we'll look for, in the first meeting in June, we'll look for those leadership council updates and reports. Great. Next, Frank, we did the financial update. And so next is committee reports. Do we have any committees met in the last period? Oh, the Climate Crisis Task Force met. Interesting meeting.
Yes.
Thomas, can you give us an update? Great.
Yeah, sure. So we met, let me see, a week ago now. For the past, I don't know, about 6 months or so since we formed, maybe longer at this point, we've just been working on, at first we were assessing the school district, seeing what we're doing, and then I would say about halfway through we've changed to formulating actual policy proposals, and we did another round of brainstorming, what we're going to come up with to propose for purchasing, food, transportation, and what I called facilities management. Hopefully we get a better name than that. And at the next meeting, which will be in June, we will have, hopefully, if we are successful, our finalized proposals for policy changes, or one all-encompassing policy change or proposal. So I think it was pretty successful. We talked about climate impacts of fossil fuels, animal agriculture, how it all goes into what the school district does. So I'm hopeful for the next meeting we have something specific and concrete to come out with.
Thank you. Emily, do you want to say anything about where the PPEC is going next? They know what we've been doing.
So yeah, I can say just a really quick thing is, so our next meeting, we'll be discussing the feedback we got tonight on after school. But we're also going to be looking at a little bit of what Jody mentioned, which was the equity in sports conversation. So we're reviewing a report that Chris Sawyer and mainly Chris Sawyer, but Steve Perrin too, because he's the kind of captain in charge of BUHS, put together. So we just had a lot of questions because it was a fairly dense report. So we're going to be hearing from them. And then I know that the next thing that we'd like to do is, which was on our agenda, was to start exploring a little bit of the preschool opportunities across the district. I don't think we'll have time for that in the next meeting, but I know we plan to invite someone from the preschool team that we had heard from maybe a few months ago. I'm forgetting the woman's name, but I'm sure David will remind me later. But we plan to invite her to a meeting maybe in June, so that we can start to hear a little bit more about what's going on in preschool and what opportunities exist across the district.
Great. And Kelly has a comment or question?
No, I was just going to report on the personnel committee.
Oh, go ahead. Great.
So
Thank you.
we met on May 8th, I believe it was. And we had a couple supervisory union negotiation matters and personnel matters to address. And then we also, Lyle let us know of the necessary delay in the 1% application deadlines for summer proposals, which had been May 1st, but that was based on everything that's been going on. So that's what we addressed in that meeting.
Great. Thank you. And I spoke with Jamie Contois today, and she is going to convene a meeting of the Communications Council, so they will be up and running when we need to start advertising the upcoming vote and letting people know what we're thinking about for next year. So they're shaking off the rust and getting ready to swing in operation again. Any other committee news, committee information? Okay, I think next is we have an addition to the budget, or to the agenda. We have a request for an Act 250 permit. Lyle, could you tell us about that?
Sure. So 47 Flat Street has requested a permit. They're planning on 15 units. They will not be expecting any students, so it will not impact any of our schools at all. And so what I need is, which actually is unfortunate, but what I need from you is to approve the 47 Flat Street Act 250 impact form.
Yeah, these impact statements are, the Act 250 includes checking with the schools before they give a permit to somebody to build a house that maybe we flood the schools and cost millions of dollars in additional space. So could I have a motion, please, to approve the Act 50, what is it called, Lyle?
Impact
statement. Impact statement for 47 Flat Street, please.
So moved.
Was that Liz? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And second?
Second, Ann?
Thank you, Ann. I see Sean and Tom want to speak. I'm going to do the vote and then I'll get to you. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we passed it. Sean, question?
Well, if I could go back to,
Sure.
I was going to make a comment about leadership councils under the, it's the last item.
Oh, great. Yes, go ahead.
Council report. And I would like to report that the Guilford Leadership Council met last Friday on May 15th. And there were 14 individuals on the council meeting. And we discussed a great deal of things about the Guilford School. We talked about the budget that we had earlier in this meeting. And so there were, Sarah Coffey was able to come, and a lot of teachers came, and tremendous amount of energy. And so I just wanted to say that, once again, that Guilford is really it's again a great group, and it's really so satisfying to be there. And they will be having another meeting this Friday, the 22nd at 1 o'clock. So if anybody wants to join the Guilford Leadership Council just to see how it goes, it's all you got to do is click onto the Zoom, and there you are. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. And the Putney one meets tomorrow, actually. So, oh, Sean, go ahead.
I have one more comment, if I could. The WSESU website has a block for leadership councils, and I think it would be really good if the leadership council used that spot to put their agendas and then post their minutes, because it's very, you know, it's very easy to see, and then the other towns would know what has transpired. So Guilford has been doing it, but I think if all towns did it, it would be a place to go and see, you know, what was being discussed and so forth.
Actually, that brings up a really good point, Sean. The Leadership Council policy outlines the staff warning of meetings and setting agendas and recording minutes, a very specific process. So, so I'd encourage people to go to the WSESD website, click on the policies, and it's pretty much the last policy in the book, or pretty close to the end of the book because it's brand new, and it outlines that for you. So I would encourage board members and principals to have a look at that policy to make sure that you're not just operating under the policy, but also under the open meeting law. Sean? Yeah.
If I could just say one more thing. In the leadership councils, I think it said that the members of the leadership council will serve for 1 year. So I'm not sure when that year starts and ends, if it runs with the school year. You know, maybe the people on the leadership councils now should be aware of that so that they can re-sign up and continue the good work. So.
Thank you. Thomas.
Yeah, I was just trying to note before we moved on that the diversity committee also met this week. I just wanted to make that noted. I think we had some good progress, specifically 2 points that we were working on, trying to get some progress done on making the workforce more diverse over time, even fostering long-term goals of fostering students who are interested in becoming teachers after college to consider coming back to Brattleboro. As one possible inroad to getting people who would want to be a part of the district. And another one was, another point that we worked on was possible diversity training for the board and administrators, looking into different avenues for any sources that would be worthwhile and which ones would be the best. So I just wanted to note before we moved on that we have met as well.
Thank you.
We should be meeting in the middle of June for our next meeting.
Julianne?
I wanted to let you know the Dummerston School Leadership Council meets every other Thursday at 6 during the closure. So we met last week. The agenda should be on the SU site. I will send next week's agenda to Barb tomorrow. But we're doing a community-wide survey on our outdoor learning and play spaces, because that's one of our big goals for the upcoming years. So that was a big item on our agenda and will be in the coming months.
Thank you. Somebody let me know that the Dummerston Council has been meeting for a long time, and I was not aware of that. So glad to have a report. Thank you. Sean, your hand up again? No? Okay. Any other, anything else on, I forgot to ask about the Leadership Councils. It ran off the bottom of my agenda. Thank you. We also have left over the recognition of visitors. I was going to try to do this at the beginning, but again, with the legislators coming, I wanted to get underway as quickly as we could. Any visitors that have information or wish to share anything with the board this evening? Seeing none. Communications. Any communications, noteworthy communications we need to share?
So David, sorry,
Yes.
this is Lyle. Sort of a communication. I've been in touch with Barb while we've been meeting here tonight,
Oh, good.
and we do need to have a warning article that states how much the school board members are to be paid, how much for the board chair and how much for individual members. So if you could take a couple minutes and determine what that is, we can get that on the warning as well.
Okay, I was going to do that after the public comment on
Okay.
non-agenda items, but and after we approve the minutes too, I was going to go back to that motion
Okay.
and revise it.
Whatever
So,
works for you.
Yeah. Any public comment on non-agenda items? Oh, Emily has a hand up.
So are we doing communications right now?
Yes.
Okay. So I had a communication in about the tennis courts, and specifically related to there being a lot of pressure on memorial parks, space in general, and maybe crowding there, and wondering when some of the spaces would be open at the schools, like the tennis courts, which are like, a big important part of the community. So my response to that was I would bring it to the board because I really didn't know about the legality behind that, because it's a school space and the schools are shut. So I guess I just wanted to hear a little bit more, maybe from Lyle, I guess that would be.
Yep. Lyle?
And I'll ask Steve to chime in as well. Steve and I have been working on this. Our plan was to open them hopefully before the weekend this weekend, because I've also been in touch with Brattleboro Parks and Recreation, and they indicated that there's a lot of pressure to get more people out because their courts are full all the time. The thing around signage is that we need to ensure people know that they can play, but they can't socialize. They have to play and leave. And there is some concern about keeping the benches up, because then that sort of invites people to sit. And so we have some concerns. But I'll ask Steve. Steve and I had talked about it yesterday, and I can't remember what the final determination was on that, Steve.
Yeah. So we've been vetting some signage, and we're using the guidance from the Vermont Department of Health. One of the challenges for us is that unlike other facilities, we will not have the ability to disinfect between uses, and we don't supervise those courts, and that introduces a level of uncertainty. So we're going to be saying that in our signs, please understand that the school is not maintaining these, not disinfecting these, so people know that. And, it's kind of a use at your own discretion. We went down from use at your own risk to discretion. So those signs, Chris Sawyer and Robert Clerk and I have been looking at various signs and kind of coming up with something that's simple. We looked at the benches. We cannot remove them because they're set into concrete. If we were to remove the slats from the benches, we'd leave an unsafe metal frame. So we're not going to do that. The other concern that it raises for us, and the track is the same way, is, as you pointed out, Emily, we are closed, and our fields are closed, just like playgrounds are closed. And it's really hard because as soon as people begin to see usage in one part of the campus, they're going to jump in and say, oh, so now I can go use the baseball field, and I can use the football field. And those are closed. And we're finding more and more often that as the weather gets nicer, that we're having to go out and remind people that they need to leave, and it's not always a pleasant conversation. I will tell you, it's the unpleasant conversations never happen with kids. They're great. It's adults who feel as though it's a green space, so they have a right to it. But anyway, long story short, with all of that, we are going to open up the courts. We're not going to open them all up. We're going to start with 3 to preserve social distancing as people are going to and from the courts, and we're going to see how that works.
So 3 courts, because I'm going to respond to this person. So 3 courts and the track, you said, or not yet?
The track has been open.
Track's open. Okay.
And the other issue with the track, it's a composite track, and we've had some people who feel as though they should bring their scooters and walkers on there, and that track is not made for wheeled vehicles of any kind.
Okay.
So we've had some conversations about that as well.
And just one last question so I can include it is, so you're working on signage, so you're thinking the courts will be open this weekend, or should I just say a little later?
Well, you know, we're hoping this weekend. You know, we have a couple of events here going on Friday for our class of 2020 that, you know, that's gonna take priority.
Yep. Okay. So, and where would it be posted? Just at the site, or is there going to be an announcement? Okay.
It'd be posted at the site. We'd probably put something on our Facebook page.
Okay.
And I'd probably call Carol a lot and let her know.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. We also have the clerk's report. This week includes accepting the minutes from May 6th. So could I have a motion to accept the board minutes from May 6th, please?
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you,
Second.
Tom. Thank you, Thomas. Second?
Second.
Is that Ann?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Motion moved and seconded to accept the minutes from May 6th. All those in favor, please unmute and say aye.
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 Any opposed? The minutes are passed. So now we have to circle back around to the thing was actually the last thing on the agenda that became the second thing on the agenda, which is the vote. And it turns out that there is another article that needs to be on the warning because our article, thank you to Ruby McAdoo for taking the time to look it up and find it and send a message in the chat room. Our articles of agreement indicate that the annual meeting sets the salaries for the school board chair and school board members. And this year, first year of this board, the chair stipend was $6,000 and each board member was $4,000. So what is your pleasure for that article for the warning? I'm going to guess that the silence means we should leave it the way it is. And just copy it from, oh, there's Sean.
Yeah, that is exactly what I would say, that you
Great.
ought to have the article just as it was stated last year.
Would you make that a motion, Sean, and then we can go home?
Sure.
Or at least can be.
I would make a motion that the school board compensation should remain the way it was the previous year, which is $6,000 for the chair and $4,000 for each of the directors.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Tim. Moved by Sean, seconded by Tim. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it, the motion passes. So I believe that completes the work on our agenda for the evening. We need an executive session. There's only one thing I know of, Lyle, and that's around contracts. Is there anything else? Okay, then could I move that we enter executive session under 1 VSA 313 to discuss contracts where the board has determined that premature general public knowledge would clearly place the school board or people involved at a substantial disadvantage. Invited into the executive session are the superintendent of schools. Second?
Second, Emily.
Thank you, Emily. Moved and seconded to enter executive session. We will not be making any decisions when we come out, so I'm not sure if I need to put you in the waiting room or not. Rich?
If you would, please, that way I can catch the end of the meeting.
Okay, we'll do it. I'll try to remember to wake you up when we adjourn. Great, thank you. Okay, so at this point, would everyone but the board and Lyle please leave the meeting? And we'll wait a minute or two for that to happen. And Rich? 4.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night. Pause. Oh, I just.
Oh, there
screwed
you
up
are.
by pausing it.
No, you're
Okay.
recording now.
Are we? Oh, no, it's paused. Okay, now I'm going to push it again. Now we're recording. Okay. Thank you, Ann. Start again, please.
No problem. Mr. Chair, there being no further business before this board, I move that we adjourn.
May I have a second?
Second.
Oh, gee, somebody's in a hurry.
The rest
We'll
of
give
the
it to
board
we'll give it to
second.
Michelle. Okay, it's moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye and have a good night's sleep.
Aye.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.